The Industrial Development Corporation was established in 1940, a national development finance institution set up to promote economic growth and industrial development in South Africa. In its 75 years of existence, billions of rands have been invested and hundreds of thousands of jobs created. Established sectors have been expanded and new sectors have been built up. Companies have been saved and others have been started. To celebrate this milestone, the IDC hosted both a gala dinner and a conference looking back at the work the IDC has done and the way forward for the various sectors they're involved in. At the gala dinner, CNBC Africa's Nozi Pombandra caught up with CEO of the IDC, Jeffrey Kleiner.
It's an opportunity for us to share the journey that we've traveled with most of you here, because in here we have partners. Those who still owe the IDC, that's the reason why we brought you here, so that we can still see you. Those who've helped us make those right decisions, being the board, the shareholder present as well, our service providers as well. So thank you for that. But when we look back, I think having a company that brings technology of converting coal into oil, I think that's one. IDC responding to the transformation issues is also another milestone. When the government of the day was saying it's fine to do industrial development, but ensure that in that process, the majority of the people are included. For us, that's a milestone. Now, encouraging over and above that, we know the world has changed, yes, but bringing in new technologies. We saw in the AV a company like Lodox, South African technology, which has been converted from a case where it was used in the diamond industry to help save lives. For me, that's a milestone. But also, if one looks back, I think in the last 20 years, approving over 5,500 of those businesses, the businesses that have touched many lives. For us, it is a milestone.
I want us to go back to the evolution of the business strategy, because you alluded to the fact that the IDC, perhaps of pre-democracy, is likely significantly different from the IDC of today. How has the underlying business strategy evolved with the change in that ethos?
You know, when IDC was started, we saw at the beginning the economy was closed, so then the response was different. Now we are operating in a global village where competition is very fierce. So the challenge to create sustainable businesses that will compete not only in South Africa but globally, bringing in new technologies, is evidence of how IDC has been able to respond. It has not done that in isolation. Naturally, our alignment with our shareholder, being the South African government, and the policies that have come in, and us supporting that has been evidence in ensuring that we change and be able to respond. That has also been as a result of those that have led the IDC. You know, I've been in this corporation for about just over 10 years now, and I'm probably one of the very few lucky chief executive officers to have had a very solid base, a base that has been built by those that have responded. Now, the reality is we have youth that needs to be absorbed. And now we're seeing the IDC also changing to say, how do we include youth to ensure that they also participate, not only to be employees, but to create employment, to ensure that in that process, not only will the companies that they establish are sustainable, but they contribute positively into this economy.
So you make a point, of course, on the fundamentals upon which you've been building over the past decade. If we were to just cast our eyes into the future and perhaps me invite you to look into a crystal ball, what are we building for the next 75 years? So my question really becomes, what do you think are going to be the key industries of the future, and what do we need to do now to make sure that we're well prepared for those industries?
You know, on the 1st of April this year, we actually asked ourselves that question. We said we need to start looking at least the next 75 years. I'm not saying I'll be around in another 75 years. And,
term limits.
You know, when I came in, the minister said I look very young for a 75-year-old. This is not, this is, we adopted a value chain approach where we said, when we're looking at projects or applications that come, how do we look at that complete value chain to ensure that in that process, we link businesses in South Africa, but with those outside of South Africa. But also make sure that we maximize in terms of the input that which we will get. For an example, how do we maximize inputs or raw materials from a country in the rest of the African continent, and how do we link that with South Africa? That's one. But also what we've said is we've built in a new unit which we call new industries, because we're also preoccupied to say, where are the next Sasos of this world? I think we saw one industry which we've done well. We've invested about 14 billion in the last 4 to 5 years on the renewable energy, and we know this is also an industry that is going to grow. So now, how at the back of that, we ensure that we create an industry in South Africa that can also be exported into the rest of the African continent. And also we have to look to say, are there any other, in terms of the venture capital, so of course we looked at that, are there any other, some of those groundbreaking technologies? But you can only do that if you have true partners. We have some of our funders here, those that will be able to stand the test of time. You can only do that if you take a long-term view, and that's why development finance institutions. As we speak now, in the short term, the economy is experiencing some headwinds, but you need strong development finance institutions to be able to come in and intervene. We've done that in 2008, and we're looking at doing it now as we speak as well.
Over the two-day event, concern was raised about South Africa's regulatory environment and whether or not it is conducive to business growth. Minister of Economic Development Ibrahim Patel shared his views on the importance of policy certainty for investors and the importance of localizing industrialization.
Well, let me start by saying that I agree that policy certainty is important. Investors are not going to put at risk enormous sums of money if they don't know what the investment horizon looks like. So point taken. But I think over the last few years we've demonstrated very clearly in volatile global conditions a high measure of policy certainty, at least in key areas of industrial policy. Let me give one or two examples. And I want to give an example, Nosipho, that talks to localization. 5 years ago, if you looked at the South African transport landscape, every new minibus taxi was imported. Every bus that was bought by a municipality was imported. And we used the policy framework of government to put in place a set of measures that secured huge new investment in taxi manufacturing. 2 new factories, basically, one brand new factory and one expanded production facility was created. In bus manufacturing, about 6 new enterprises were started. And today we have more than 35,000 taxis that have been made here in South Africa. Now, the people who've invested there would not have done that if they had not felt that there was sufficient certainty on policy for the long term. Are we getting some things wrong? Yes, we are. We're dropping the ball here and there. But by and large, I think the storyline on industrial development has been certainty. Companies have been able to invest, to secure returns in very, very difficult circumstances. So I know, of course, that there are areas that we need to improve. And I would say that what an investor critically needs is both policy certainty, but there are also other areas that's important to investment. They need to know that they've got infrastructure that they can bank on, that there's a skilled labor force, that there's competition in the market, that you're not excluded if you're a new entrant. Those are some fundamental areas, and in each of those, there are things that we are doing and that I'd like to talk to you about.
Absolutely, Honourable Minister, and I think I want to go back to the point that you've just raised around a focus on localizing industrialization. I want to go back to this debate that has been quite prominent in South Africa around the development of black industrialists. Give us a sense from where you sit in terms of the progress you think we've made in this regard, and how do you think policy can be sharpened further to make sure that we accelerate gains in that direction?
Okay. Well, let's have a look backward first. Well, perhaps let me start with saying, why is black economic empowerment important for us? You know, very often the argument is made about the historical inequities, the need for redress. And of course, there are those arguments. But there's a more fundamental commercial rationale to empowerment. And that is, you're not going to build a solid, sustainable economy using the talent pool of only 4 million South Africans. If you have a nation of 55 million people, find talent across all parts of that society. And it cannot be that China would have grown as fast as it did if it relied on only a small number of Chinese to draw its talent pool from. So I think that there's a compelling argument why we need to go this direction. We've made some progress. The IDC, for example, in the 21 years of democracy, has invested about 60 billion rand in companies that have at least 25% black ownership. Now that sum of money has very often given black South Africans a stake in companies. Where we now see the need to be is not to have 25% or 30% or indeed 40% of a company, but to be the major shareholder and to effectively control the operation, to bring more South Africans into making things, into digging things, into growing things. So the IDC has done a few things there. I can give you an example of, I don't know what shoes you're wearing tonight, but are you familiar with this very comfortable pumps that you can carry in your bag and you can get to work? You can kick off the high heels and put the pumps on.
Do you have a pair?
We have a pair that's locally made. Oh. And we have a pair that creates jobs in South Africa and actually is fantastic. Now, there was a black South African woman who looked at the clothing and footwear industry, and everybody was saying, look, this industry is dying. And she said, I have the energy to do something different here. And she set up a factory in a place called Elsie's River, and she's now making large numbers of pumps and other women's footwear that's flying off the shelves in South Africa. She's created 300 jobs. Her plan is to build that to 500 jobs. Now that woman was backed by the IDC, and she's one of a number of black industrialists that have already been supported by the IDC.
After the ad break, we take a closer look at South Africa's mining sector and the importance of buying from locally grown manufacturers. Stay tuned. Welcome back to this special celebration of IDC's 75 years of industrial development. During the conference, several panel discussions were held, from 21st century mining, extracting value for all, to Made in South Africa, the revival of manufacturing through new manufacturing methodologies. During the mining discussion, Chris Griffith set the tone with a not-so-rosy picture for this sector in the near future.
So, you know, and the macroeconomic challenges are a challenge for us all. It makes it very, very difficult at the moment for mining companies to make money. And the moment mining companies don't make money, they're not contributing to taxes. We have less royalties coming into the fiscus. There's less ability to pay employees more. There's less ability to employ more people. And there's certainly less money to put into communities surrounding our operations. So the very first thing that's impacted is the profitability of the mining companies. So those are the macroeconomic headwinds, but at the same time, there are a number of issues that we are making already a very difficult environment more difficult. The challenges within our country, we have likewise very difficult labor environment in South Africa with declining productivity. Productivity has declined now for about 15 years, every single year. We have the energy challenges that everyone's aware of, but it's not just the energy supply challenges, the cost of energy. I'll give you an example for this year. All of the saving initiatives that we've been able to come up with in Anglo Platinum result in about 300-400 million rand. If we face a 20% increase in energy, that's going to increase the energy bill in Anglo American Platinum by 800 million rand. So we've got labor difficulties, supply of energy and energy cost difficulties. Policy uncertainty is a big issue, and it's a big issue for the investors in our companies. Many of the CEOs who are traveling, are going overseas, are trying to convince both domestic and international investors to invest in our companies, are saying to us, we don't know if we can make money going forward in your companies. We don't know what the next round of BE and transformation will need to be. We don't know what Mining Charter 3 will look like. We don't know whether we can invest money into your companies. And by the way, we have lost substantial amounts of money in your companies. And they're also saying to us that, we don't know whether the government actually is serious about companies making money for those who invest in it. So that's what sort of it feels like at the moment. Having said that, I don't speak to one mining CEO or the executives in mining companies who actually don't believe in their companies. They don't believe in the future. I see every single company I talk to who believe that this is not a sunset industry, that this is the start of the next wave of growth in South Africa. But it is a difficult environment to make that happen. And, I was thinking about how best to describe it. And it feels to me like this is like when you put in your span of oxen in front of your wagon. So the mining industry is our wagon in South Africa. And there's many different parts of the industry that pull this wagon. It's mining and it's services and all sorts of things actually pull this. But it feels to us this big fat oxen that we've got that are the mining industry is the one part of that span of oxen that we all beat as hard as we can, or we tie its legs together, yet it's part of the oxen that's trying to drag the country forward. And I think that's what it feels like, Abel. I think we've got a great industry, we've got fantastic potential, we've got very serious headwinds, both external and local, but we have this enormous possibility that if we all work together in partnership, and it's not just because we're sitting in a panel here, it requires companies and the labor unions to work together, government and us to work together. It requires all of us to put our effort behind it to say how do we look after this industry and how do we use the mining industry to take South Africa forward. And I think every CEO that I know, and I certainly speak for myself, sees that potential in the future. It may just take a couple of years to get through this time.
A key theme throughout the conversation was the importance of skills development in the sector.
We do have a mismatch of skills, and graduates who have the technical skills are important and they're being absorbed in the market appropriately, whether it's their geologists and also engineers, your mechanical engineers and your electrical engineers. But where we need more employment opportunities, it's where we have unemployment, and that's for the artisan level and trade and technical skills area. And that's where the opportunities are, and that's where our technicons and higher education environments must make sure that they train the technical skills in partnership with business to make sure that we've got the welders, we've got the electricians, we've got people who can drill, and we don't end up having a situation where we look for skills outside of the country because you don't have your technical artisan skills that are required by the economy.
During the session on Made in South Africa, the moderator asked Massmart's Kuseni Dlamini on what their organization is doing in supporting locally grown manufacturing companies.
Just as a starting point from a Massmart point of view, we believe that sourcing locally is a strategic imperative. I think it's almost a no-brainer that to be as close as possible, that the source of production has to be as close as possible to the place where consumption is taking place. Why am I saying that? Because it just simplifies logistics. It also simplifies the supply chain, and it also enables you to unlock efficiencies. When Walmart came to South Africa, there was a lot of debate around its impact and its role. The president of COSATU has highlighted some of the issues on the labor side, and I'm pleased to say that we are the most progressive retail company when it comes to trade unions and labor rights, not just in South Africa, but we carry that philosophy outside of our borders to the rest of the continent. When it comes to the issue of manufacturing and sourcing from local suppliers, credit has to go to the visionary leadership and intervention of Minister Patel, who is here, together with his colleagues in Parliament, who really come with a very innovative global concept of public interest in big mergers and acquisitions. And I think that generated a lot of debate. It was a very contested and very difficult process, especially on the mass side. But what came out of it, I would like to argue, has really been a very, very innovative and very cutting-edge way of managing retail operations in the 21st century. We set up a supplier development fund, and the fund is managed by a diversity of stakeholders. It's not just run by Massmart. We have representatives from the Minister's Department, representatives from DTI, and also other stakeholders from this SME sector. And we have a very clear philosophy of running it as partners in doing what is right. One of the things that the minister has pushed, and which I've also advanced quite strongly internally, is really to look at opportunities for us to import substitutes so that we start creating jobs locally. Because by importing goods from outside, you're effectively exporting jobs from South Africa. But by manufacturing as much as you can locally, you're assisting with job retention, but also equally important with job creation. So we've had some successes in 3 small areas which are very modest. I'll be the first to say there is more that we can and must do. I just want to cite 3 examples where we've been successful. If you go to our macro store, for example, you find a cooler box under a brand called Camp Master. Those cooler boxes are manufactured by a company in the Eastern Cape called Ikusasa. It's in Stutterheim. And that was out of the efforts of our teams going out there, identifying champions, and integrating them into our supply chain. The second area, if you go to Builders Warehouse, which is one of our formats as well, you look at nails there and going forward. One thing I didn't know before we started on this journey was that actually even nails are imported. You just take it for granted that the nails you use at home come from South Africa, they're manufactured by South African workers. We are now on a journey with a local manufacturer to stop importing nails and manufacturing them locally. And by doing that, we create jobs locally, and we contribute to local economic growth, and also we advance the strategic vision of the South African government in terms of the National Development Plan, the New Growth Path, and IPAP as well. I would like to say that our strategic vision is not just to look at sourcing from local suppliers for our local stores. We would like to walk the journey with South African suppliers to Africa and to the rest of the world.
Over the next 75 years, the IDC will look to do more of the same, promoting entrepreneurship through building competitive industries and enterprises based on sound business principles, and at the same time promoting sustainable industrial development and economic growth.